This is a collection of 5 parts retelling the manhwa called Apocalypse Death Game. Before I begin, I'd like to thank each of you for the invaluable support you've shown through likes, comments, and subscriptions. Thank you. I wish everyone an enjoyable viewing, and for those eating, bon appetit. Blinding sunlight flooded the lifeless Hello dear friends. This is a collection of 5 parts retelling the manhwa called Apocalypse Death Game. Before I begin, I'd like to thank each of you for the invaluable support you've shown through likes, comments, and subscriptions. Thank you. I wish everyone an enjoyable viewing, and for those eating, bon appetit. Blinding sunlight flooded the lifeless expanse around them, and the long-ruined city lay buried under tons of sand. Bai Wu lay motionless on the scorching surface, completely unable to understand what kind of place this was. He stared intently straight into the scorching sky when, all of a sudden, system windows began appearing before his eyes. They kept warning him that he shouldn't stay lying there, since the ambient temperature had already reached 60 degrees and was still rising by 0.2 degrees every minute. The system was openly mocking the hero, whose skin was already covered in burns, sarcastically saying that all that was left was to add a little spice, and you'd get some great roasted meat. The unknown program kept mocking the protagonist, stating that a crispy crust had already formed successfully on his back. Bai Wu kept confidently ignoring the pop-up windows from this annoying system. The poor program simply couldn't keep up with the protagonist's torrent of thoughts, until Bai Wu himself seemed to find something interesting for him. The system kindly informed the hero that the ruins before him were a public toilet, over 700 years old, and more than that, it has a danger rating of 3.5 stars. A clueless young man kept hearing non-stop about the terrifying creature living in that place, though he still didn't fully understand what criteria were even used to assign that rating. The system joked about a beautiful road nearby, where for 100 kilometers there was absolutely nothing. But just 1,600 meters from them, 2 fallen were hiding in ambush, and the program snidely recommended paying the monsters a visit, since they'd surely be pleased with such an unexpected meal. The protagonist, with a phenomenal mind, realized perfectly well that he now receives absolutely all the hidden information about the things he looks at. He reasoned logically, if 3 directions held a deadly threat, only the last one remained. And the system immediately congratulated the hero on correctly guessing the direction where the rescue water was. The hero's hands were tightly bound, and countless burns were visible on his emaciated body. The system was theatrically whining about Bai Wu ignoring her, while he, looking at the shackles on his wrists, was theorizing that in this world, he was most likely a criminal. The program readily revealed that the local nobility had turned these handcuffs into effective tools for total surveillance of slaves. The hero quickly processed all the information he received, while the system kept urging him to move on. Bai Wu understood crystal clear that at such a monstrous temperature, he would be done for in exactly 49 minutes, so he had to hurry. Yet in his cold mind, only one key word kept echoing: surveillance. He stared very intently at the sky, completely ignoring the physical pain from the blazing sun. Meanwhile, somewhere in a luxurious apartment, certain people were extremely unhappy that this boy had dared to hold out in those conditions for a full 10 minutes. Aristocrats were astonished that the slave chose the blue door, and with bloodthirsty impatience, they longed to see the hideous monsters devour him. Only one mysterious woman with bright yellow eyes watched the screens closely and literally couldn't look away from that strange, unflappable guy. And the main character himself was making his incredibly hard 2,996 step from the start of this journey. Fragments of information surfaced in his memory about some tower, and that beyond it, it was practically impossible for ordinary people to survive. Bai Wu forced himself to think as intensely as possible, piecing together all the information he'd gotten from the system into one puzzle. The tower had a clear hierarchy of floors, and the shackles introduced a continuous record of how people survived in the wastelands. After putting the facts together, the hero decided he'd ended up in some twisted survival game of chance. The hero's shoes were literally melting in the heat. He was fully aware that over the time that had passed, the temperature had risen to 70 degrees, and he urgently needed to hide somewhere. Suddenly, the hero's gaze caught on something interesting. It turned out to be an old hydrant. The system immediately started praising itself smugly, claiming that half the credit for finding the water should belong to it. The hero carefully touched the metal with his hands, and he was genuinely amazed that, even in such hellish heat outside, the water inside stayed ice cold. The system explained that most likely the water pipe underground simply hadn't had time to warm up yet. The hero made the only right decision, to head into the sewer, where the temperature had to stay normal. Bai Wu also figured that, since the water supply was working here, the technical entrance should logically be nearby too. The protagonist really did manage to quickly find the heavy hatch, which was accompanied by a system message saying that Bai had managed to discover a magnificent refuge for rats and cockroaches. The protagonist understood perfectly well that this shelter, in any case, was only a temporary measure. In such foul conditions, it's impossible to last long. Bai Wu, after putting all the pieces together, decided firmly that the only real way to survive was to find a way back into the tower. He knew for sure that he was being watched closely, but he wasn't sure whether those bastards could hear him or even understand his language. The hero slowly raised his shackled hands, preparing to make it clear to the bloated spectators that he had no intention of playing by their rules. Then, with a stone face, he showed two juicy facts, causing an extremely excited reaction from the system. The aristocrats on the other side of the screen were simply furious at such an arrogant slave. One of the rich men, in blind rage, threw his drink on the floor, shouting that this guy was just an ordinary actor, and that what was happening was a cheap setup, and he wanted this man to just die. Meanwhile, someone else was genuinely thrilled that his crazy bet had paid off. It was a real miracle, because ordinary weak people in this zone died many times faster. A well-connected girl, who apparently had a lot of clout in this society, was listening closely to the phone report. She was informed that this guy was just an ordinary beggar from the lower floor, and that he definitely had absolutely no talent. With icy calm, the girl expressed hope that she wouldn't have to explain to her subordinate exactly what he should do now. Meanwhile, in the suburbs, an old man put down the phone receiver. It seemed like he was having trouble breathing from the excitement. He said out loud that the target was still in the blue zone, and this item had to be disposed of urgently. The butler also stressed firmly that her guests must suspect nothing, and finally asked what level of talent the hired mercenary had. He was told it was the Steel General, whose escort force was at the 4th stage of the 2nd level. The butler considered those numbers quite good, but demanded that the mercenary be extremely careful, because the fallen in that area were incredibly strong. The man with real expertise said that if these monsters catch even a drop of negative emotion, they'll attack right away. The butler, with a grim face, gave the final order. Even if the mercenary has to sacrifice his own life, he must eliminate the target. In the end, the man slowly began to leave the room, promising to carry out the task flawlessly. In the damp sewer darkness, the hero suddenly sank into memories. Images from the past began to emerge in his mind, like when he was brutally beaten as a child, and how his tormentors were amazed that he didn't care about the pain at all. They fearfully called Bai Wu a demon, and truly believed he was a heartless freak who simply couldn't feel emotions. Even at his old man's funeral, everyone around noticed perfectly well that the protagonist didn't shed a single tear. By then, this cold-blooded young man had already ended up in police custody. From early childhood, the hero understood perfectly well that he was fundamentally different from other people. Once, veteran police officers discussed the fact that Bai was the one who had to crack the complex case that had been gathering dust in the archives for a full 10 years. He was considered a true genius, but people also quietly joked that only a freak could understand another freak's logic so precisely. And then, on one ill-fated day, the police squad tightly surrounded the criminal from all sides. In desperation, he immediately aimed the firearm at the officers and fired right away. The one who coldly took this bullet was Bai Wu himself. Surprisingly, there wasn't a trace of fear on his face. Yeah, the police managed to catch the criminal, but the protagonist was left lying on the cold asphalt, bleeding out fast. Back in the present, the icy water splashed noisily everywhere. Bai Wu washed himself greedily, washing off the dirt, after which, deep in thought, he stared at the water surface. He really wanted to see his old face in the reflection, but right now he looked completely different. Meanwhile, the system started making fun again, claiming that the face of that slave from the 1st floor of the tower could safely be rated 9 out of 10. The program kept relentlessly pestering Bai Wu, who just as relentlessly ignored it. Until, at some point, the hero wondered, since the system was running these brutal games, couldn't it also control them? In response, she only smugly suggested that Bai surrender and not make a fool of himself. It seemed the protagonist's sharp gaze had caught something important in the tunnel's gloom. He felt that a threat was rapidly closing in on him, and believed he had to act immediately. Bai Wu had an interesting question: what would happen if he actually pretended to be scared? The system chose not to answer that question until the hero himself came to a dead stop. Heavy footsteps could be clearly heard from around the nearest corner, drawing relentlessly closer to the boy. Truthfully, surprisingly, a look of eager anticipation flashed across Bai Wu's face at that very moment. It seemed like he was already up to something. The professional mercenary moved confidently through the sewer. He turned the corner under the system's helpful notice that this opponent had a talent level of 755. The Steel General, whose power was at the 4th stage of the 2nd level. And the program considered this guy a genius. The system was absolutely sure that this man would easily finish off Bai Wu. Meanwhile, the protagonist himself seemed to have a completely different opinion on the matter. Bai Wu could tell by sound alone that he was about 10 meters from the enemy. But because of the extremely winding architecture of the sewer drains, it will be very hard for the enemy to get close to the hero. While the system assumed it didn't matter at all what the guy did, he would definitely die. The protagonist greeted the killer casually, genuinely glad that he had finally arrived. Bai Wu was amused by how someone so strong could move so slowly. Meanwhile, the enemy, caught off guard, immediately began to fidget nervously and move around the area in search of the guy. Bai Wu calmly advised his opponent not to be surprised, fully understanding that he simply couldn't make out how an ordinary slave knew about his abilities. The hero was amazed that the mercenary truly believed some ordinary poor man could survive in such a place for so long without hidden trump cards. The protagonist kept pressing, laughing and saying the mercenary was truly innocent, since he believed this was just a standard assassination job. The hero declared with theatrical enthusiasm that the rich in the gaming house must be having a great time right now. The boss sent a man to kill him, but didn't he think this was just part of the plan to make the show more interesting? Bai Wu reasonably figured that a plot where the slave didn't die, but instead started brutally tormenting all the hunters, sounded a lot more intriguing. The protagonist virtuously kept stalling with talk about the show's plot and how strange it was that an experienced hunter had been sent to certain death in this cursed place. Unexpectedly, the protagonist began striding forward confidently, straight toward the man, after which, with an absolutely cold expression, he stated that in this place, it would be the enemy who would remain forever. The hero promised he'd step on the bastard's corpse and keep mocking the aristocrats. And at that very moment, out of the darkness behind him, an enormous number of glowing eyes suddenly appeared. Something was behind the protagonist, staring coldly straight at the mercenary. Bai Wu immediately extended his finger in command, and the monster moved toward him with tremendous force. Strangely enough, instead of devouring the hero, it passed right by him, as if through emptiness, and then instantly caught the mercenary in its deadly grip, crushing him in its powerful vice. Meanwhile, Bai Wu, coolly watching this, just smiled with satisfaction. A mercenary was losing his voice, begging the monster to stop, but in the end, he was simply killed. And the stunned system congratulated Bai Wu on the victory. The hero was only upset by the fact that the clean water was now polluted with blood. Meanwhile, the system kept strongly advising him never, under any circumstances, to thank the monster in person. She claimed that at such close range, even the slightest hint of negative emotion was enough to instantly provoke the monster into attacking. But Bai Wu replied that he was a positive person and would certainly not show any negative emotions. He immediately, as if nothing had happened, started thrashing around in the dirty water, looking for prey. Suddenly, Bai Wu's fingers felt a strange device. As it turned out, it was a return device that the hero so desperately needed. He immediately spun that thing to activate it. The system notified me one last time that the area had been explored by 4.5%. There are still 35 fallen alive, and the hero also couldn't get the doomsday puzzle pieces. The program recommended ignoring the rest for now and getting out of this hellhole as soon as possible. Bai Wu was grinning broadly. He sincerely hoped that inside the tower, it would end up being a lot more fun than this place. In the end, a glow enveloped the hero's body, and he disappeared, heading off into the unknown. The action quickly shifts to the Foreign Intelligence Corps headquarters, namely, Office Number 7. There, a sweat-drenched subordinate nervously reported to the leadership that the rescued man's name was Bai Wu, and that he was a youth about 18 to 19 years old. The subordinate grew noticeably more nervous with each second, then timidly said that this was all the scant information they had on this person. The captain of the 7th unit, named Gu Qingyu, seemed clearly unhappy that this was all the information available. Meanwhile, as the captain of the 13th Division present here, Lu Mu was laughing his head off at the fact that the so-called talented people of Qingyu couldn't even properly question the guy. The subordinate, red-faced with shame, reported that they simply couldn't carry out a proper interrogation with Bai Wu, and in the end it was the protagonist who lured the secret information out of them. Lu Mu kept laughing, genuinely amazed at what utter incompetence he'd ended up hiring for this squad. Gu Qingyu became curious about exactly what this Bai Wu was begging for. The man awkwardly said that the mysterious hero asked about the number of floors in the tower and how the fallen ones even came to be. In general, the investigator was stunned that the protagonist was asking about basic information that even a 3-year-old child knew. But when Lu Mu heard that the protagonist had also asked to be shown the talent list, he immediately stopped laughing. He then matter-of-factly asked Gu Qingyu to just hand Bai Wu over to his 13th Division. The commander of the 7th unit was genuinely surprised that his colleague was so readily willing to recruit this guy. As for the commander of the 13th unit, he cleverly claimed that in the end, this Bai Wu simply won him over with his way of thinking. Gu Qingyu changed the subject and began talking about the increasing number of poor people going missing. Meanwhile, unlike the other man, he had no idea why this guy was getting into this business. He thought that this should be handled by a separate detention unit. Gu Qinyu asked why noble soldiers should even bother with the poor, since by the rules they only considered people above the third floor their masters. In the end, the commander of the 7th Corps told what he managed to learn about the underground gaming house, and the commander of the 13th immediately understood that it was about illegal hunger games for the amusement of the nobles. Gu Qinyu said with disgust that the croupier at this gaming house turned out to be someone from the 4th floor, and for fun they sent the poor to their certain death in the blue zone. It seemed that as soon as Lu Mu heard about the blue zone, he tensed up at once, reasonably assuming that those people had simply gone completely insane. Meanwhile, the commander of the 7th unit continued his report. He said that the noblemen were no longer stirred at all by the white zone. But the high temperature and the extreme danger level of the blue zone stirred their blood. He was talking about one unique guy who not only managed to completely ruin the plans of the organizers of the gambling house, but also easily took care of a professional killer sent to kill him. The commander of the 7th unit added that right after the incident, he received an anonymous call from a young girl. The commander of the 13th squad didn't understand why they'd turned to the scouts for help, until Gu Qinyu explained that the girl had begged, in the strictest secrecy, bypassing the croupiers, to save this Bai Wu. As soon as the man realized that the survivor was Bai Wu, his eyes lit up with even greater interest. And Gu Qinyu, remembering that the captain of the 13th squad was good at interrogations, asked him to help crack the guy. The man immediately started getting to his feet energetically, demanding to be shown exactly where he was holding the protagonist. Meanwhile, the captain of the 7th squad calmly stated that the hero could become an excellent weapon in the future. He slowly sheathed his blade, then, looking thoughtfully out the window, said that this protagonist would need to be watched very closely. Exactly 700 years ago, the end of the world struck this world. The familiar way of life had completely changed and become unbelievably harsh, and on top of that, bloodthirsty monsters appeared, called a fallen. And it was exactly at that critical moment that the tower appeared. Nobody knew who built it or why it was erected, but only inside the tower could people live safely and hope for the future. After some time, people discovered hidden powers in themselves that let them stand against the fallen. This energy was called the accompanying force. Meanwhile, in the interrogation room, the pretty young female investigator was explaining the basics of their world to Bai Wu. She explained that the accompanying force could greatly improve a person's physical condition, speed, and other basic abilities. And to raise it, all I had to do was get outside the tower. It turns out, the longer a person stayed in extreme conditions beyond the tower, the higher their power level became. But not only did people grow stronger on the outside, but also objects that, after the changes, came to be called Seilin. Another investigator picked up the story. He explained that while the accompanying power merely improved traits, talent was already a unique, powerful superpower. As of now, 1,024 different talents have been registered. He also said that the higher a talent ranked, the rarer it was and the stronger it was. Still, most people had only weak talents, from 1,000 to 700. Precisely for that reason, people with talent above 500 were immediately recruited into the military corps, becoming their main trump card. She proudly declared that their main trump card right now was Commander Uzi. That was Gutsenho's nickname. The girl said that the guy somehow managed to survive an incredible 24 days in the dangerous blue zone outside the tower. And after that, even the members of the Straitjacket Corps begged him to join them. They told the hero that the Correctional Corps, like the external intelligence agencies, were structures approved by the ruling layer of the 5th floor. Meanwhile, while children of aristocrats usually ended up in the disciplinary corps, ordinary talented people ended up in the dangerous reconnaissance corps. The protagonist began to clearly understand the rules of the game. As it turns out, this world generously rewarded those who boldly left the tower's territory. The hero was told that the accompanying power, the Zealand artifacts and talent, all of it only grew beyond the wall. And the man who stayed there for 24 straight days gained monstrous 8th level power, which let him instantly destroy monsters when they appeared. And suddenly the interrogation room doors burst open with a crash. That was the commander of the 13th unit, who greeted everyone present with a smile. The man asked the guys to go rest, saying he had an important talk with Bai Wu. The hero, just from the aura alone, immediately understood that this man held a very high position in this place, while the staff asked the captain not to rush. The man was about to get straight to business, but Bai Wu didn't even let him finish speaking and calmly said he was ready to join them. This instantly shocked the captain's face. The veteran soldier never expected the rookie to somehow know his intentions even before they had a proper conversation. The hero firmly stated right away that he would not join that man's team, and that he planned to stay and serve here. The protagonist, with a smirk, said he was already well acquainted with 2 people from this team. The man still couldn't wrap his head around how Bai Wu knew everything. The protagonist, leaning back in his chair, began laying out his deduction. He was sure the investigators knew nothing about him, which was why they conducted this interrogation. The fact that they still hadn't killed him meant they weren't in on it with the people who kept him in hell. Bai Wu reasoned logically that if he wasn't an enemy, then after all his antics, it was reasonable to assume they'd want to recruit him. But also, seeing the girl's reaction to this man's appearance, he realized that his visit was outside the norm, which meant this guest was the captain of another unit. Also, the hero was absolutely sure that, because of the broken shield and old wounds, this man had clearly fought in the wastelands against far more dangerous fallen than the hero had seen before. Even Lumu was stunned to find out how the guy even knew about his shield. The protagonist stated that the man's rough scar on his arm was exactly 3 centimeters below the wrist. Bai Wu was sure that if a man had risen to the rank of captain, he possessed tremendous strength, and it was unlikely anyone could have left him a scar like that in close combat. The hero explained with scientific precision that ordinary people had their anatomical wrist raised. Meanwhile, like the man sitting in front of him, it was visibly sunken and deformed. Mathematically, that meant he'd used a heavy shield for a long time, since it had deformed his bones that much. And the breaking of the Tsilin artifact is clearly not something ordinary fallen could have done. It seemed the veteran commander of the 13th Squad was totally stunned after that monologue. That precise an attack made him completely forget why he'd come to that place. Bai Wu slowly raised his hand, then vividly mimed the likely fight in which the man got his scar. This display finally convinced the commander of Bai Wu's genius, and he simply had to bring him over to his side, at any cost. The protagonist dryly said that in the chart he was given, only weak talents below number 700 were listed. He demanded the full database without hesitation, but before he could even explain why, the commander had already bolted out of the interrogation room. The captain ran as fast as he could to please the protagonist as soon as possible, because he saw incredible talent in him. Sometime later, a thick stack of papers was already on the table. A breathless man good-naturedly assumed the guy knew very little about the tower. The man couldn't speak properly because he was short of breath after running. Meanwhile, Bai Wu coldly stated that the kidnappers had most likely used some method to artificially block his memory for safety. After catching his breath, the man decided to tell, in secret, that from all 3 lower floors of the tower, it was Yujo who possessed the greatest talent. And he was 256th in the rankings, and there hadn't been anyone at a higher level for a long time. The protagonist was interested to hear about the top 100 talents. The man immediately thought of the horrifying talent number 76, called complete dissolution. He said that this destructive talent was accidentally awakened by a miner 20 years ago and overnight shot up in status to the very heavens. The protagonist boldly assumed that this miner didn't have much luck in the end. The captain, in a gloomier mood, confirmed it. He said that in the end, the man was taken away by unknown people, and all that was left was to wonder whether they were from the 5th floor or the mythical 6th. It turns out they didn't even investigate the case, and instead tried to hide any information about the person forever. The protagonist was especially interested in the specific talent listed as number 24, which, with just one glance, allowed him to obtain absolutely all hidden information about a person's character and abilities. Bai Wu thought that this powerful talent was quite high up. And he also believed that it was necessary to learn as much information about the world as possible. The hero was desperate to learn the truth about the hidden side of his personality. Bai Wu was genuinely curious how a street vagrant with such a frail body ended up with such an incredibly rare skill. And he was sure that today he had gone beyond the tower for the first time, which was completely at odds with how rare the skill was. The protagonist was curious whether anyone could forcibly measure someone else's talent. And the answer to that question was a firm no. The man said that the true talents of many veterans in the Corps had been deliberately hidden and never showed themselves, which was great news for the hero. In the end, the protagonist became curious whether there were cases where a person had more than one talent. And it turned out that although at first only one talent could be awakened, there were stubborn rumors that on the 6th floor people said, when killing certain ancient fallen, you could awaken additional talents through blood. But the seasoned man sincerely believed that even if such terrifying creatures existed, it was better to avoid them. As for the protagonist, he believed to himself that his current talent wasn't suited for direct combat. He needed to find a way to unlock a new combat talent as soon as possible. Unexpectedly, the man got to his feet with enthusiasm, then walked up to the protagonist, addressing him as brother. The captain reminded us that he'd brought out a secret chart for battle and proposed making a mutually beneficial deal. The protagonist immediately returned the documents without emotion, after which he apologized to his sworn brother, saying that although he was a good man, he would still choose the 7th branch. When asked why, Bai Wu calmly said that he had clearly understood that the 7th Division most often left the tower for raids. And the shocked man thought that this was exactly one of the main reasons why he shouldn't have gone into that unit. The desperate man promised that if Bai Wu wanted out of the tower, he could transfer him to the advance unit, and if not, to the interrogation team. Bai Wu let out a heavy breath, then immediately guessed without a doubt that the man was not married. He was surprised once again that the hero had managed to guess that too. Bai Wu, with a philosophical air, advised the captain to marry the one who loves him, rather than waste time on unrequited love. After that, he said that the 7th Division had initially made a good impression, and that's exactly why he's going to choose their ranks. The hero also added with a slight smile that there was one more final reason, which was of great interest to the irritated commander of the 13th Squad. Bai Wu smoothly left the room, saying in parting that the number 13 had always just been very unlucky. This argument immediately sent the seasoned man into deep shock. Meanwhile, the future hero colleagues standing in the corridor were already happily waving back to him. A while later, inside a massive elevator, Commander Udzies said matter-of-factly that fingerprint scanning had revealed Bai Wu never had an ID card before. But he also proudly added that since the guy had joined their structure, he automatically got the status of a lower-floor citizen. They also quickly found housing for the protagonist. The commander dryly informed him that Bai Wu would have to pay the rent himself, 400 tasser a month, out of his own pay. Bai Wu watched the commander closely. At that moment, the system in his head stated that during the game, the hero could often encounter a powerful mentor character. And in the protagonist's new life, the strong character ironically turned out to be the short guy, barely a meter tall. Captain Gu officially introduced himself with a system notification saying that this person had actually been hiding something in his past that could even interest the people on the 6th floor. Unexpectedly, the protagonist addressed the captain by his secret nickname, Atsuyo. That seemed to annoy him greatly, as he immediately shot his colleagues an angry look, practically shouting at them for daring to tell the newcomer his nickname. Bai Wu said he had a very big favor to ask. The commander immediately assumed he wanted to safely get into the interrogation group and said they could easily arrange that. But Bai Wu cut him off in an even tone, saying that he would like to officially leave the tower as early as tomorrow morning. The man frowned and said they had already checked the protagonist's escort force. He admitted in surprise that thanks to spending less than 2 hours in the blue zone, it had anomalously risen from level 1 to a solid level 3. But he wanted to clearly explain that even to fight a weak scab, this was critically insufficient. Bai Wu understood perfectly that the commander only wanted to warn him about the danger. And he just demanded to be allowed to go on a raid with a high-level partner, solemnly promising that he wouldn't get in the professional's way. Bai Wu seriously said he wasn't looking for certain death. He was also absolutely sure that even the commander himself wouldn't want such talent sitting idle in the tower. Uju, seeing how stubborn the guy was, finally agreed reluctantly, promising to take the hero in as the 6th member of his group tomorrow, and they'd head for the white zone. It seemed the other guys were plainly upset, reasonably assuming that this Bai Wu was just too naive. A while later, the commander announced that they had arrived at their destination. After that, he gestured toward the building where, from that moment on, the hero would officially live. Bai Wu was in the transit zone, right below the first floor of the tower called Jianlu. The hero's new colleague politely apologized for making him wait. He explained that Captain Uju had gone to handle some formalities, and he himself suggested not to waste time and to go to the protagonist's new home. Along the way, he advised Bai Wu to put on a cloak. Turns out, now they could afford to buy basic things for the rookie, since the captain set aside a little money for it. A guy and a girl enthusiastically told the protagonist about how this place worked, while strongly advising him, under no circumstances, to buy Jianlu artifacts from the local merchants. To back up their words, a video appeared on the ad screen, where some man was, an ordinary shovel, passing it off as Jianlu, who had spent a full 17 hours outside the tower. With an enthusiastic look, he claimed that just a tiny drop would be enough to immediately match the effectiveness of several people. The con man insisted he would never sell such a treasure unless he himself had joined The inner system was literally begging the hero to look away from that utter nonsense. The girl was clearly outraged that this guy had the audacity to brazenly pose as a member of their corps. The angry Yuan Shu immediately went to complain to the captain, so he'd deal with that peddler. The male colleague was genuinely worried about her, and rightly told him to go after her before she did something stupid. The man was about to object, but he realized the newcomer was absolutely right. He immediately shoved the bag of the hero's money into his hands and hurried to say goodbye. Left alone, the protagonist immediately spotted something interesting, which the system promptly notified him about. Exactly half an hour later, the hero was already standing by the entrance to his new home. Once inside, he found a note on the table from Gu Qinyu, explaining about the special watch issued to all newcomers for detecting negative emotions when entering beyond the tower. The attached guide clearly stated that when the negative emotion level reached 75 units, the whole team was required to use the disc to get home immediately. The system sincerely praised this mechanism, arguing that sometimes people don't realize what emotional state they're in, and this device reliably helps track that indicator. At the same time, the system mocked me, saying that in any case, this thing would be completely safe for the protagonist. However, she added that there are more interesting things in the box, namely a powerful tranquilizer that can artificially suppress emotions. According to her, soldiers usually used it just before entering the danger zone. The muscles relaxed, and the person entered a state of complete calm for 5 minutes. Sure enough, once the time runs out, a harsh side effect is inevitable, and the person starts to feel incredibly intense emotions. Bai Wu, without a second thought, calmly injected the contents of the syringe into himself. The system was seriously surprised by that reaction and figured the guy must have been desperately craving negative emotions at last. The hero didn't reply to that notification, and the system had no choice but to wish him luck. Exactly 5 minutes have passed since then. The system curiously asked whether the protagonist felt anything. And the other one said with mild annoyance that he still felt absolutely nothing. As a matter of fact, this was exactly the result he had expected from the start. The next day, the action unfolded at a monumental site, from which people were leaving the tower grounds. The system said these giant steels had the mystical ability to create passages through space. But they also served as a shield, blocking the mysterious people at the top of the tower. These words only raised even more valid questions for Bai Wu. The system kept insisting I stop for their own good, and under no circumstances get involved in this matter. Soon, all the squad members arrived at the rendezvous point. Strict Tuju introduced the recruits, who will also take part in today's reconnaissance on equal footing with everyone else. The first man introduced himself as Wang Shi. The system immediately informed the hero that this kid was from a wealthy family on the 3rd floor. And he set out on a dangerous reconnaissance mission instead of the comfortable elite corps, solely to face real danger head-on. When asked whether the hero had safely hidden the artifacts in the bag, he nodded calmly. Meanwhile, the long-haired guy in the background, with unmistakable arrogance, demanded that this puny recruit not dare get in their way. That arrogant guy was named Lin Wuzhou. He absolutely tactlessly said that since he and the hero barely knew each other, even if he were to die ingloriously, he definitely wouldn't mourn him. The protagonist, without batting an eye, shot back that even in theory he couldn't get in the way, and then with a slight smirk, added that the girl looked pretty good though. That bold remark instantly provoked the hot-tempered Lin. Unexpectedly, another short guy friendly tugged at the hero's clothes and with a smile, introduced himself as Shang Xiaoyi. The system warned Bai Wuzhou that this boy, despite his harmless appearance, actually possessed truly monstrous physical strength. Having taken this in, the protagonist extended a hand and respectfully introduced himself in return. Next, a graceful blue-haired girl walked past her companion and firmly shook Bai Wu's hand. She introduced herself as Yin Shuang. The inner system was absolutely thrilled by this beautiful girl. She seemed to the system like the most reasonable and normal one in the whole group, though, like the captain, she hid dark secrets that could have greatly interested even the residents of the 6th floor. The hero logically figured to himself that this was most likely a hidden and rare combat talent. At that moment, the protagonist remembered that the expedition was supposed to set out with 6 people. Indeed, when asked about another member of the squad, everyone present acted in unison as if they knew nothing. Only the captain grimly approached Bai Wu, coldly saying that the guy was already dead, and sternly advised the newbie to think more about himself. The main character noted to himself that everyone in the group was quite the hidden villain. The commander of the 7th squad loudly announced that it was time for them to set out. Suddenly, a voice came over the speakers, announcing the other team's return. A huge portal immediately began to glow brightly, and a gaunt man slowly emerged from it. He was a member of the advanced reconnaissance team. He reported, breathing hard, that he'd reconnoitered the area, and found no dangerous fallen inside the starting zone. Now the hero clearly understood the mechanics of how people learned in advance about the situation on the other side of the portal. The man from the local administration asked the next group, through a megaphone, to come up to the gates. Gu Qinyu, without wasting time, set off. He boldly stepped straight into the glowing space, then placed his hand on the control stone and stood motionless for a while. After this procedure, the captain beckoned the guys over with a commanding gesture. And, in a tight formation, they moved together toward the blinding light. Just before the crossing, the caring Yin Shuang asked the hero to check the watch and the tranquilizers. He briefly reported that he had done everything. The girl quickly explained to the newbie that this was a spatial portal and said that after entering it, the location number updates. She firmly insisted that Bai Wu go first. The protagonist bowed and thanked him for this opportunity. We saw the number generated on the board, and he was genuinely shocked. It clearly meant that over 700 years of the Tower era, the surviving people had already explored many millions of regions. Burning with curiosity, he eagerly awaited his journey beyond the tower. A bright, blinding light appeared, after which Lin Yuzhou slowly opened his eyes, frowning. The whole team ended up in an incredibly grim place, right next to a huge, dilapidated building. After looking around, Lin guessed with a shudder that this had once been a psychiatric hospital. At the same time, the system alarmingly told the hero in his mind that if they decided to get inside that building, it would be damn hard for them to do any research there. The AI claimed this place was once a true breeding ground for evil. And it was simply terrifying to imagine how many concentrated negative emotions were felt by the patients locked up here. Because of that, the system was practically begging Bai Wu not to go there. However, after a moment's hesitation, she reluctantly admitted that deep down there was a crucial secret that only our hero could uncover. Sighing, she wished him luck, and Bai Wu logically thought to himself that this secret was surely somehow related to the Doomsday Puzzle fragment. Wang Shi, reading the sign closely, noticed that this hospital had a rather strange name, and enthusiastically suggested we go inside and check everything out. Meanwhile, Shang Xiaoyi began to tremble theatrically, saying in a quavering voice that there were far too many fallen hiding in there, and he was scared to death. The system, after scanning a stable 0 reading on this guy's biometric watch, smirked and called him a peerless actor gifted by God. It was blatantly obvious that inside, he was completely calm. The commander, checking the instruments, said the temperature in this eerie place was perfectly normal, around 46 degrees, but strongly advised the guys not to let their guard down for a second. At the time, the system in the hero's head was genuinely amazed.
Since when?
An inferno of 46 degrees became considered normal temperature. Sharp-eyed Inshuang, scanning the area professionally, noticed an important detail. Around there wasn't any grass or minerals at all. That clearly meant they were quite close to the ruins of a large city, and behind them stretched only a broken road and a huge number of dried-out trees. Wang Shi kept insisting we go inside. Anyway, they had no other reasonable way out of the area. He also noted that this kind of grim scenery usually turned up in a more dangerous blue zone. And the vigilant fighter coldly advised his new comrades to be extremely careful and by no means rush into action. The haughty Lin Uzu was theatrically astonished at how timid that much-praised protagonist actually turned out to be. And with a venomous smirk, he told him to go back to base in disgrace, if he was so scared. The fearless squad leader decided to go first. He confidently reached his hand forward, then with a creak began slowly opening the massive metal gate. The guys stood at the open entrance for a while, holding their breath. After that, they started going inside one after another, while Baio looked around with an analytical eye. That very arrogant guy Lin was genuinely stunned by the scale. In front of them stood 4 massive buildings, each 19 stories tall. Meanwhile, the hulking brute was asking the commander which of these 4 buildings they were going to investigate first. Baio immediately said in a cold tone that they had no choice, they could only go into one building anyway, the very first one. He reasonably pointed out that in all the other buildings, the first floors were completely blocked. The hero added that in order to get into the second building at all, they first need to go up to the top, the 19th floor of the first building. The seasoned guys were a bit surprised by the rookie's phenomenal powers of observation and noted that this guy turned out to be far from useless dead weight. Baio himself fell deeply into thought over such strange, illogical architectural choices. He seriously thought that maybe the former owner of the complex had intentionally laid out the route that way, because he desperately didn't want anyone to go into the second building at all. Shan Xiaoyi continued his brilliant acting with a fake tremor in his voice, claiming there were as many as 17 vengeful spirits in the building, which terrified him immensely. The steadfast commander, in a stern tone, ordered all the guys to stay alert. After a moment, the heavy doors to the building creaked open, and the wary kids froze at the entrance to the dark room. Given the layer of centuries-old dust, they quite reasonably assumed this eerie place had been abandoned a long time ago. The squeamish Lin Wuzhou kept complaining that this hill was a complete sanitary mess. While he was gloomy, the sharp-eyed hero turned his close attention to something truly frightening. It was something bright red, smeared right on the wall. After thinking for a moment, Bai Ul realized they were bloodstains arranged in some kind of pattern, and moreover, they had been left there very recently. In response to the hero's direct question of whether he saw some hidden meaning in the system, it only complained irritably that it was not a crazy patient, and therefore physically could not make out anything meaningful in these symbols. However, the system was able to confirm one frightening fact with certainty. This blood was left on the wall exactly 2 days ago. This discovery immediately raised a huge number of questions for Bai Ul, questions that unfortunately, even the system couldn't give any clear answers to. Kramila said that there were too many locked rooms in this place, and replied that it would be completely inefficient to explore this huge space one chamber at a time. The intrigued captain asked the hero what he thought about it. He calmly replied that in theory, they might be able to get the information they needed by searching the rooms one by one, but he was personally sure the deepest secret was in the unreachable fourth building. And it seemed those words from the hero once again enraged the arrogant boy Lin. The protagonist frankly didn't like having to spell everything out for the veterans, so he was going to explain everything clearly for the first and last time. It seemed that such unshakable rookie confidence had greatly piqued Inshuang's interest, and the captain imperiously asked the hero to continue his story. Bai Wu patiently reminded his comrades of the fact he had learned earlier. Of all 4 buildings, free entry was available only in the first. Bai Wu vividly simulated a hypothetical situation in which a patient in Ward 4 urgently needed help from the staff. By the time it would take the doctors to get to the right wing, the poor patient would clearly be dead. Captain Kivri fully agreed that this kind of architectural layout was indeed extremely unusual. After a pause, the hero firmly stated that this place, by its logic, resembled a strict prison more than a hospital. Bai Wu reasoned logically that, since the complex had only one narrow entrance, the prisoners physically had only one place to escape. And because it was a prison, the farthest wing, namely the 4th, was the most secret place in the whole complex, where important prisoners were held. The impressionable Gromala seemed seriously stirred up by that information. Meanwhile, the sly Shan Xiaoyi, with a trembling voice, suddenly pointed to a spot in the hall. Imitating primal terror, he said the rusty elevator had just, for some reason, started moving on its own. The captain immediately, with the most serious expression, advised everyone to prepare their weapons at once and stay alert. Meanwhile, Shang Xiaoyi was already saying with a slight smile that, by the looks of it, they'd probably have a long climb up the stairs ahead. At the same time, Bai Wu was only detachedly interested in one big question. By what laws of physics were some fragile places completely not destroyed over the past 700 years? The old elevator kept going down, and judging by the display, it was already on the 9th floor. While they waited, the captain told of strange cases when objects could activate on their own. For example, in an abandoned amusement park, the Ferris wheel could suddenly start working. He generally believed the rules outside the tower were twisted, and that over time, not only space changed here. Listening to this, Bai Wu thought that people simply treated these supernatural phenomena, which couldn't be logically explained in any way, as the new rules of this world. The clanking elevator finally rattled down to the 1st floor. The entire combat team tensed at once, gripping their weapons tighter and preparing for the battle ahead. The oppressive atmosphere around us instantly became dozens of times scarier. Some unimaginable thing slowly began, with a creak, to pry open the rusted elevator doors, and then it let out a deafening scream at full force. The terrible monster immediately attacked the people with incredible animal speed. The seasoned captain, gracefully dodging the blows, shouted loudly for the less armored allies to fall back. Hutz and, with an unfamiliar move, gripped his blade tightly. He professionally prepared to make a sudden lunge and immediately, at a mad speed too fast for the eye to catch, fiercely attacked the monster. The unarmed Bai Wu watched this whole dance of death with a completely cold, studying gaze. He didn't even flinch when the severed head of a monster rolled right to his feet. The system was helpfully telling the hero about the captain's weapon properties. It was a powerful item called the Fallen Must Die, level 19D. This blade had a useful property. The moment he touched the flesh of the fallen one, he magically lowered its defense and increased the chance of hitting its weak spot. Captain, shaking blood from his blade, proudly declared that an elite unit had no reason to fear monsters of the weak 2nd mutation level. After which he suggested the allies continue on and head straight to the 19th floor. Meanwhile, the genius hero logically pieced the facts together. He thought that since this weapon had been outside for exactly 19 days, and the commander had stayed out there non-stop for a full 24 days, the blade had successfully become a magical Zelen on its 5th day in the wastelands. All the allies laughed nervously and were sincerely pleased by such a quick and ridiculously simple death of the terrifying monster. Meanwhile, the curious hero crouched down and touched the severed head of the slain fallen one with his bare hands. It seemed the arrogant guy Lin had no idea what kind of filth that crazy Bayo had just done, and he shouted in disgust, demanding that he drop the disgusting thing and come to them at once. The cool-headed protagonist, ignoring the screams, carried out a full visual diagnosis of this creature and all the anatomical changes in its body. The system stated in confusion that the fallen, specifically those of the 2nd level of mutation, still looked very much like ordinary people. The conservative system completely did not understand the logic of why the strange hero was now so carefully undressing this corpse. As if suddenly, in the pocket of the worn-out clothes, Bayo managed to feel some twigs and a scrap of paper. He immediately looked at the blurred contents and, thanks to his skill, instantly understood that it was a torn page from some kind of diary. Bayo understood the past perfectly. This page was torn so roughly precisely because the guards were forcefully taking the diary from the inmate, and he, in a panic, was trying to save at least something as a keepsake. That curious hero was also very interested in the date listed, namely the year 2026. He became insanely curious what historical year it was now. Bai Wu was also extremely curious about what kind of magic kept this fragile leaf completely intact for 700 years. While he delved into mysteries, the cocky guy Lin kept screaming hysterically through the whole hall, complaining that the entire elite squad was forced to wait just for him. Interrupting their thoughts, the protagonist cut off his comrades in a firm voice, so they would all head immediately to the 11th floor instead of the 19th. He silently showed the crumpled paper he'd found and stated authoritatively that, judging by the notes, the danger level in this building could be many times higher than expected. The protagonist calmly stated that, most likely, very powerful Fallen were hiding on the 11th floor, and their squad could fight them for a warm-up. While he was saying this, Liazu kept loudly protesting the fact that the newcomer was brazenly taking command and making all the decisions on his own. In response to the tantrums, the protagonist only taunted the boy mockingly, grinning as he called him little sister, because of his well-groomed, excessively long hair. For a while, a tense, truly deathly silence hung in the slowly rising elevator. Then, through the screech of metal, a creepy sound of childish giggling rang out, and Shang Xiaoi immediately caught it with his sharp attention. At last, the guys were able to safely reach the 11th floor. They, with weapons at the ready, began cautiously stepping out into the dark corridor to the now clear, loud giggling. From the darkness, someone's otherworldly voice could be heard clearly, cheerfully assuming that living people had come here on purpose to play with him. The voice kept talking non-stop, desperately trying to psych the squad out. Says tearfully that he waited an incredibly long time for people to arrive. The vigilant hero gestured to ask the kids to be extremely careful, pointing his finger precisely at the last room at the end of the corridor, where the sound was coming from. Bai Wu noticed a creepy detail. That voice was strikingly like the death cry of a young girl. And from the outside, it seemed as if two completely different voices had painfully intertwined into one. Suddenly, thick black sludge started dripping from the ceiling. A drop splat right onto the blue-haired girl's shoulder. And a moment later, a black hand materialized out of the shadows, followed by a deafening laugh. Indeed, this time the lightning-fast captain intervened just in time, and with a wave of his blade, he protected the girl from being seized. Experienced Uju, in a stern voice, asked his subordinates to be twice as careful and, with all their might, stay calm so as not to feed the monster with fear. Yet the shrill laughter kept echoing loudly all around. And new writhing arms kept appearing right from the ceiling. The system anxiously alerted the hero that one of the guys had gotten way too emotional, and in doing so, drew the attention of that ghost girl to the squad. Since this monster's base level was by no means low, and the much-praised captain simply couldn't defeat it with a single blow. Panicking Lin Wuzhou had no idea where all those countless hands came from, and the control bracelet on his wrist showed a fear value of 11 units. Meanwhile, the furious brute was preparing to destroy the enemy with brute force, and the reading on his bracelet was glowing at 9 units. The mysterious odds of AUI, still playing the fool, were worth only a modest 7 units. But at that very critical moment, Yin Shuang was the weakest link. She had a dangerous panic level of a full 21 units. The captain, meanwhile, as he saved her, moved down the corridor at an impossible speed. In an instant, he attacked those limbs countless times, turning them into minced meat. Uju, with a roar, demanded that his men move as fast as possible and not toy with life. At the same time, his own commander's watch showed the icy number 3. The system exclaimed in admiration that the current captain of the protagonist was an incredibly cool warrior, and she thought that if Bai Yu himself were even half as cool, he would have long since been surrounded by crowds of beauties. But it seemed the icy hero was completely uninterested in such attention. He stood perfectly still, calm as a statue. His watch showed a steady, solid 0, clearly meaning his psyche was experiencing absolutely no negative emotions. Another of the black hands reaching for him was deftly cut off by the captain. The entire elite squad was desperately trying their hardest to fight the spatial monster, but it was starting to seem like those hands had no end, and they were appearing in absolutely unlimited numbers. Exhausted, Lin Wuzhou fought desperately and frantically for his life, and was incredibly furious at the real Bai Wu off to the side. He absolutely couldn't understand how, by some miracle, the blind monster wasn't even touching the rookie. While Lin was raging, the cool-headed Bai Wu correctly assumed that the little girl's voice directly and destructively affected their comrade's mood. In this bloody madness, even the hidden Shang Xiaoi unexpectedly acknowledged in his mind that the calm hero was a cold, emotionless monster, since he still somehow managed to feel no negative emotions. After assessing the situation, the protagonist decided to head out alone to scout ahead, since he could clearly see that his new companions were far too busy cutting down the shadows. Commander, noticing his movement, demanded that the hero not move under any circumstances and wait just a little longer for their help. At that, Bai Wu said in a steely tone that until these frightened kids completely stabilize their shaken emotional state, the tentacles of fear will keep endlessly appearing from the ceiling. After dropping that line, the hero calmly kept walking into the darkness, saying the guys should follow him as soon as he finally calmed down. Covered in sweat, Gromola was beside himself with rage and, breathing hard, asked the captain where he had even dug up that arrogant bastard. While a huge hand was forming on the ceiling, the sharp-eyed commander, looking grim, figured that if the novice's device showed a perfect 0, it meant either the device was broken, or there was something terrifyingly wrong with Bai Wu himself. Meanwhile, leaving his squad behind, the hero of Bashuna entered one of the creepy hospital wards, and without wasting a single precious second, immediately began methodically searching the cluttered space inside. Bai Wu slowly walked around the room until the omnipresent system asked him to pay attention to one very remarkable thing. The hero saw an old dog kennel cage that, under the influence of energy mutated, became a Zelen, and could now perfectly trap anyone inside it, with no chance of escape. The system was 100% sure that the trapped poor creature had never managed to get out of this devilish trap on its own. She claimed that only when someone deliberately let it out did it finally become free. The thick chain, which the hero then noticed, was also a dangerous artifact, and the system darkly joked that for games it was clearly too heavy. As he took a step, Bai Wu almost miraculously stepped on a syringe. The system immediately panicked and asked him to be extremely careful. She quickly explained that these ancient needles could very well still contain active traces of an unknown drug. After that, the system kept trying to convey something muddled to the hero's mind, until he suddenly sharply turned his heightened attention to something else. I ignored the chatter, and that even though the system itself, just a second ago, was confidently saying that there was absolutely nothing left to look at in this empty place. Defending itself, the system hurriedly said that all the paper documents had long since been destroyed by time, and that the ward's owner was, fortunately, not on site right now. That's exactly why she kept urging Bai Wu to shift his attention to the massive table, where several secret items were laid out at once. As it soon turned out, all of it had been the personal belongings of that poor prisoner who'd been tortured. By the unwritten rules of this damned place, you had to choose only one of them. And each of these artifacts could grant only one thing: an hidden and powerful talent, a ghostly friendship with a poor girl, or else her endless hatred. The system strongly recommended thinking the decision through carefully and seriously. Because by the laws of wasteland magic, as soon as he picks one, the other two items will simply disappear forever. The system politely listed the options. The old book turned out to be a diary with incredibly strange contents. The Java key could open either a safe shortcut or a direct path straight into the abyss. Bai Wu was hard at work thinking that this Arkhim, which had survived by a miracle, probably held the very answers that could be of strategic interest both to him and to Captain Uju. And maybe this will help them get closer to the truth. The hero reasoned analytically that the strange wooden comb was the most suspicious, since it was the only item with no system hints at all. Meanwhile, a sensible key at least logically fit some hidden door in this building, where in theory further clues could be hidden. The system was simply in indescribable raptures over such a calculating brainwave from its protagonist. Then suddenly, he let out a noisy breath and, with a slight smile on his face, unexpectedly said that all this crazy stuff going on was just great nostalgia for him. The system nervously stated that everything happening was more like a crazy lottery, where you could win talent or the favor of the fallen, or else lose fatally and get the fallen's concentrated hatred, and he would definitely pursue the hero until his death. After thinking for a bit, the system philosophically stated that, most likely, blindly hating people is completely natural for those monsters. But that wasn't an exact answer. And the system immediately that these were just her analytical assumptions. Meanwhile, while Bai Wu was examining the riddles in the silence of the ward, the battered team of protagonists in the hallway finally, with great effort, dealt with the last crawling hands. After the massacre ended, the biometric fear indicators of the out-of-breath Wang Shi and Lin Wuzhong finally dropped significantly. As for the captain, wiping the sweat from his brow, he firmly urged the squad to move on down the corridor at once and look for that runaway loner Bai Wu. Bai Wu thought that before making his final choice, he needed to fully understand everything first. Based on the layout, he understood perfectly that the two rooms at the end of the corridor were the laboratory, which for some reason was empty. The hero realized that the test subjects had been closely observed, probably kept in cages and injected with some experimental reagent, possibly related to the fallen. The protagonist believed that during the experiment, the thoughts of the test girl had come into contact with the thoughts of a completely different person, and most likely in that critical time window, there simply wasn't enough all-consuming hatred for the mutation. All of a sudden, Lin Uzu began pounding on the door, loudly asking how the investigation was going. He didn't understand why the protagonist wasn't opening up, while Shang Xiaoyi was frankly upset that the fallen one still hadn't shown up fully. The system genuinely didn't understand how the hero figured out that someone had been visiting the test subject, and their minds intertwined. He said he easily understood it thanks to the note he found. Before his full conversion, this fallen one could hardly have met with her so casually, because no one in their right mind would have let those two monsters talk freely. But the fact remained a fact. The subject was explicitly mentioned in the text. Because of this, the protagonist assumed that she had a gift and could communicate with the other prisoners telepathically. It was also extremely suspicious that she was moved to the guarded second building. The system, with a touch of dark humor, joked that someone else among the patients had ratted her out hard. The protagonist made the most logical conclusion. The fallen in the second block were many times stronger and smarter. And most likely, absolutely everyone whose abilities showed any sign of awakening was forcibly transferred there. Lin Wuzhou was beside himself with rage because the hero wouldn't come out. He was already getting seriously nervous, because the door wouldn't open, and Bai Wu stubbornly stayed silent. In a rage, he decided to just knock it off its hinges. However, the observant Commander Ruju advised his subordinate in a cold tone to take care of his legs. In the next instant, terrible hands began bursting out in masses from beneath the filthy floor. The commander reacted immediately and with astonishing grace was able to deflect the attack, preventing the monster from harming his ally. Lin Wuzhou shouted in panic for the captain not to let down his guard. More and more viscous black liquid seeped out from under the concrete, and in the end, the hero's frightened allies found themselves surrounded on all sides. Meanwhile, the system confirmed that Bai Wu had successfully dealt with the diary and the key, but as for the wooden comb and the information, there was nothing at all. Thanks to the note, the protagonist knew perfectly well the test subject was a woman, but he still didn't understand who in their right mind would use a comb in such a hellish place. Bai Wu asked the system with a hint of skepticism. Is there really no hidden data about the item? And she proudly asked not to doubt her professionalism. There really was no information. While the level on the clock of the calm protagonist held steady at a solid 0, on the frightened Yingxuang's wrist, a terrifying critical value of a full 72 units of negative emotions had already appeared. She struggled with all her might to fend off the bony hands reaching toward her, but one still slipped through fatally. The limb ended up deadly close to her neck. But at that moment, the hulking Vengshi stepped in, resolutely intercepting the monster's arm with incredible strength. The heavily breathing guys didn't understand why their emotion levels had suddenly shot up, and with mounting dread, they realized that Pashi himself was rapidly approaching them. Despite his anger, Lin Juyu sincerely worried about the protagonist. He could come face to face with a monster at any second. He asked Comrade Xiaoyi to scan the room's aura, but he was already in a state of deep panicked madness and could hardly give a coherent answer. The resolute captain declared in a commanding voice that he would personally clear a bloody path for them now. Getting ready for his signature move, he promised that as soon as they saved Bai Wu, the squad would head straight home. Uju shot off and started moving at an insane speed, expertly destroying every shadow hand in his path. But as soon as the handle of the right door started to move, he stopped dead in his tracks. Bai Wu glided out of the darkness of the lab, with a completely calm expression on his face. Arrogant Lin was grinding his teeth in anger that the hero didn't answer and had them so nervous. Protkines politely apologized, while holding a comb in his hand, and in a cold tone said that it was time for them to head to the 19th floor immediately. Lin Uzu stepped toward the hero with displeasure, pressing him on why he had stubbornly stayed silent when he was being called over and over. Meanwhile, Shang Xiaoyu was surprised to notice that all the terrifying monsters that had been bothering them had vanished without a trace. The guy refused to believe that the weak rookie had taken down the powerful fallen all by himself, until Bai Wu calmly explained that he had only temporarily and cleverly suppressed the source of the anomaly itself. Captain Uju was extremely curious to know exactly what was happening on the other side of the locked door. But the hero firmly insisted on going up to the 19th floor, arguing that there were no more leads left here. Lin Zhou, as usual, grumbled, while Wang Shi and the recovered Shang Xiaoyu didn't complain at all, sincerely relieved that the protagonist was okay. Poor Yingxuang was still clutching that heart-rattling bell, but fortunately, her negative emotion count had quickly dropped to a safe 11 points. In the cramped elevator cab, the curious protagonist asked the captain whether all those monsters who had fallen in the past had absolutely once been ordinary people. The hero reasonably assumed that if they themselves stayed beyond the tower's dangerous limits for too long, then under certain tragic circumstances, they too might become bloodthirsty monsters. After those frightening words, a truly tomb-like silence fell in the elevator. Yuzio let out a heavy sigh and was the first to break the silence, asking dryly whether Bai Wu had even read the instructions for his biometric watch. He sternly reminded the rookie that when it hit 75 units, the device would start blaring an alarm, and the absolute upper limit of the psyche was 300. The captain explained it in detail, right down to the meaning of 75. The dial glowed a reassuring green. Once it went over, it instantly turned an alarming orange. And when the value reaches 175, the color changes irreversibly to blood red. The sound of the stopped elevator sharply cut off the commander's story. They safely arrived at the right floor, and the rusty metal doors began to open very slowly, revealing darkness. The inner system quietly joked in Bai Wu's head that it was exactly because of such blunt and unpleasant questions that allies so often tried to avoid him. And though the captain never finished his grim dialogue, the brilliant hero had already understood everything perfectly without any extra words. He was absolutely sure that if an enormous amount of dark, negative emotions built up in a living person's soul, his mind would finally break, and he would inevitably turn into the same kind of fallen monster. The armed men stood ready, warily scanning the huge empty room. The old windows here were sealed shut with heavy shutters, leaving the area in an impenetrable, oppressive darkness. The seasoned captain ordered everyone to turn on their flashlight beams in a stern voice. And Scout Xiaoyi needs to quickly use her spatial detection skill. The kid immediately reported in a trembling voice that right behind the next massive door were no fewer than 6 dangerous fallen, and each one's mutation level was significantly higher than that monster Uju had already managed to kill downstairs. On the other side of the barrier, a suspicious noise could be clearly heard. The young Xiaoyi was highly excited. It seemed battle adrenaline had gone to his head, and he really wanted a good fight. But the commander had ordered everyone to wait strictly for his command, and he clenched the hilt of his trusted weapon until his knuckles cracked. One of the monsters lurking in the dark turned its head hungrily toward the boys. The other monsters also stared intently at the uninvited guests. The protagonist became genuinely curious whether their commander Uju had always been that recklessly brave. On this question, the huge brute said with undisguised pride that yes, always. He enthusiastically said that even though Wang Shi himself was a model defender, their brave captain always charges straight into the thick of it ahead of him. Meanwhile, Uju himself has already managed to get to a critical, deadly proximity to the hungry monsters. He immediately rushed into the attack, emboldened by the brute's words that, even when facing an enemy objectively stronger than him, the captain somehow always came away unscathed. The elusive commander fought at an utterly unbelievable superhuman speed, becoming a deadly whirlwind. Even the all-knowing system was genuinely surprised by such an amazing reflex. And the attentive hero, watching this dance of blades, logically assumed that the mysterious accompanying force simply develops, individually in each fighter, only their strongest natural strengths. The brute, breathing heavily, confirmed the suspicion. Overall, this magical power evenly enhances basic physical abilities, but it also always gives a massive extra boost to the specific strong traits. A simple man couldn't have described this complex evolutionary process more clearly, so he plainly said that the smart hero would understand it all for himself firsthand, as soon as he moved on to the second stage of development. The system in my head immediately started building hypotheses. Since that's the case, Speedy Uju likely put absolutely all of his potential into speed alone. Wancha probably pumped pure attack and health. According to her calculations, the arrogant Lin Wuzhou split his stats between attack and speed 50-50, while Aoi's strange luck maxed out his perception and attack. At the point of analysis, the powerful system from Yingshuang literally froze. She only hesitantly suggested that the fragile girl was, objectively, the weakest combat link. In short, the system sincerely believed that in this whole squad, except for the sane girl, absolutely everyone else were just total adrenaline-crazed maniacs who couldn't care less about their own lives. After a while, the breathless captain let out a relieved sigh, shaking black blood from the blade. In a completely calm tone, he informed the shocked allies that he had successfully, without a single scratch, finished off each of the 6 monsters, and with a familiar gesture, asked the guys to follow him farther into the darkness. The system, scanning the mangled corpses, told Bai Wu that these were extremely dangerous fallen, already at the 3rd level of mutation, with razor-sharp limbs that could slice through metal with ease. The system stated authoritatively that after that fateful day, when those gruesome doors literally devoured the hospital director alive, they obeyed only the direct telepathic orders of that poor prisoner girl. The protagonist, having weighed the facts, reasonably assumed that these 6 had served as elite gatekeepers, guarding the entrance to the second building. Using the brief lull, the curious Bai Wu decided to ask the commander why they couldn't just find shelter, hole up in the relatively quiet first corps, and wait for their strength to grow passively and without risking their lives. Hearing this, Lin Wuzhou was genuinely stunned that the hero had absolutely no basic survival knowledge. He explained with blatant mockery that this twisted wasteland world itself repels them, like a foreign virus. It's precisely because of this aggressive rejection that every 4 hours of continuous stay in their physical bodies inevitably causes dangerous interference. The inexperienced protagonist didn't fully understand what these disruptions actually meant in practice. The guy smugly explained that these were the body's most powerful system debuffs, like a critical reduction in movement speed, uncontrollable fear of light, and so on. Meanwhile, the captain confidently went through the next creaky doors, to Lin's words that in this damned place they always ran into unpredictable, random interference. The genius protagonist immediately realized the harsh truth. Because every 4 hours a new heavy debuff is applied, they simply won't be able to safely stay in one place and build up power. They'll die of exhaustion. The system was even more astonished by this fact, since the Grim Uju had been outside the tower for a full 24 days straight. And mathematically, that meant the Steel Commander had endured more than 100 terrifying debuffs in total, and yet managed to keep fighting the strongest monsters without interruption. The system urgently gave the battle its most important strategic advice: under no circumstances try to recklessly jump over the hulls. If they can't take the story key hidden somewhere on the grounds of the second building, then on the third they physically won't be able to get anything valuable. She also upset the guy with some bad news, saying that some huge creature had already swallowed that precious key. The system insisted that, although the crafty hero could have easily ridden out on the captain's brute force alone, he desperately needed to personally use that very wooden comb to ultimately, through cunning maneuvers, get far more rewards. Then suddenly, out of the darkness came a creature, smiling bloodthirstily with its toothy maw wide open. In a creepy, rasping voice, it welcomed the foolish humans to its personal death arena. All of a sudden, a pulsing blue magical glow flared on the wrist of the unflappable commander. The anxious companions immediately warned the protagonist loudly to be extremely careful. Right in Uju's hand, as if out of thin air, a strange antique lantern appeared, emitting dazzlingly bright light. The system whispered to the hero that this was a legendary artifact with the dramatic name Medusa Gorgon's Lantern. This incredible thing had a terrifying mass petrification effect on enemies and possessed an enormous level of 4D. The fearless Gu Qinyu moved gracefully through the vast hall, the magical light dispelling the darkness. Naive and Xuan, full of hope, assumed that since the passage they needed was on this same floor, they could save time and head to the fourth rescue wing. The protagonist, in a cold tone, shattered her illusions. The girl is partly right, but the quest key is hidden precisely in the dangerous building too. He also strongly advised the allies not to relax, because ahead of them is a far less safe white zone. The bewildered brute genuinely didn't understand how the rookie hero knew all this in such detail, but he shrugged and suggested going ahead to take a careful look around. Then suddenly, the commander walking ahead stopped dead in his tracks. He flatly said that to go any farther, they'd have to follow one cruel rule. The key location can't just be destroyed. Bai Wu immediately understood what was going on, while the experienced Uju explained the important nuances. Usually, most locations outside the tower can be easily smashed through with brute force, breaking down walls. But in special story zones with the key, it doesn't matter at all what godlike power you have. Without the right item, the magic barrier can't be broken. The internal system noted, with melancholy, that the concept of an invisible wall in games was very familiar to it. Suddenly, young Shan Xiaoyi panicked. He screamed that the rusted elevator call button wasn't responding at all to his frantic presses. The protagonist was genuinely surprised to find a fake, prop elevator here. Then the system urgently asked the hero to look at the sign right above the elevator. And there, to his horror, the unfamiliar number 19 was lit up, and the ominous blinking 0. A little lower, it says lower level 1. It was too blatant and eerily hinted at the classic 18 levels of hell, which was clearly a bad omen. The system grimly stated that the protagonist's true final goal was at the very bottom of this metaphorical hell. And getting there directly would be very difficult and deadly dangerous. In the end, the doomed guys sighed and accepted that they would have to make a long grueling descent down the dark stairs, floor by floor. However, after going up one flight, they stopped in complete confusion. There was simply no staircase beyond that, the path ended at a solid wall. The seasoned commander understood everything right away. This devilish building was deliberately designed in such a twisted way. After going down just one level, you have to fight your way through a long, dangerous corridor to find the next staircase at the other end. With concern, peering into the darkness, the attentive Lin Wuzhou noticed an inscription on the wall. His mind refused to understand how they could possibly have magically ended up on the -1st floor, when they had logically been on the 19th just before. With a heavy heart, the squad continued its grueling descent and soon reached the 4th basement level. After ending up on the -10th floor, the exhausted Lin honestly admitted that if it weren't for the rescue magic light from Yuzu's lamp, they would have had an incredibly hard time in this thick darkness. Going even deeper to level -16, the kid noticed a creepy trend. The lower they descended into the ominous abyss, the more mauled corpses of other fallen ones they came across along the way. What terrified everyone to the core was that each monster was horribly mutilated beyond recognition and mercilessly torn into bloody shreds. Even seasoned veterans started to get seriously worried, assuming that someone here had conducted horrific, inhuman experiments on living flesh. Like a trembling aspen fox, Zhang Xiaoyi reported in panic that with every passing floor, he could feel more clearly how they were relentlessly closing in on an unbelievably powerful fallen one. He honestly admitted that, for the first time in his life, he felt this awful and helpless. He was truly terrified, like an animal. The Grim Bruiser soberly reasoned that if they could clearly sense the target's aura, then this thing had clearly noticed them long ago and was waiting for visitors. Unexpectedly, Wang Shi noticed that the protagonist walking in the center suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. The thing was, Bai Wu had received a very strange encrypted system notification with a riddle. He immediately remembered a similar message he'd gotten back in the safe city near the antique shop. Ignoring the confused looks, the hero began carefully searching for something at the very bottom of the travel bag. Fragile Yinchuang genuinely understood what he was looking for, until Bai Wu triumphantly took out an old, worn film camera. Lin Wuzhou, with his usual venomous arrogance, began to scold the naive fool. There was no point in taking useless things on a dangerous ride. The chance that an ordinary soapbox camera will become a powerful artifact is vanishingly small, and the extra weight only gets in the way when making an emergency escape from monsters. At those tedious annotations, the protagonist only smiled silently and mysteriously. The internal system quickly explained to him that this device's basic aptitude for magic is indeed low, but even with stats like that, it can still be incredibly useful. It feeding on dark energy will quite possibly unlock new amazing abilities. The system quickly dictated a huge, complex number that the hero had to repeat to himself while looking at cell 12. Also, she strictly warned that an unstable camera can only be safely used twice a week, otherwise it will break. He immediately pressed the camera to his face and confidently pressed the shutter button. To everyone's enormous surprise, in pitch-black darkness, a blindingly bright magical flash burst forth. While the stunned brute stood there with his mouth open at the fact that the junk had worked like an artifact, the skeptic Lin stubbornly kept believing that the blurry photo wouldn't help them at all. Without taking his eyes off the developing photo, the protagonist calmly said that this unique camera takes pictures not of the present, but of the distant past. The number he mentioned is the exact date and time the footage was shot. In the end, a colossal, terrifying monster clearly appeared on the paper, bound tight like a wild beast in heavy steel chains. Frowning, the commander didn't fully understand the tactical value of the photo until the brilliant Bai Wu guessed aloud that these unique fallen, with such a high level of mutation, must surely have an extraordinarily advanced intelligence. Opening Yuziu grimly confirmed that some very rare fallen do indeed retain basic human traits, such as coherent speech and logic. But the secret archives also describe those who have moved to a completely different, higher stage of evolution. They're respectfully and fearfully called evolutionaries. Bai Wu remembered this important name for good and said with confidence that the monster in the photo was not just a test subject, but the chief guard himself, with incredible combat power. At that very moment, terrible sounds echoed from the depths of darkness. In front of them stood a giant mutant spider, its eyes hungrily fixed on the stunned kids. Commander Utsuyu, in a cracking voice, ordered everyone at once to prepare for a fierce battle, stating outright that the enemy possessed an overwhelming level of destructive power. Without losing the element of surprise, he burst forward and attacked the monster at tremendous speed. However, to the entire team's surprise, the giant opponent, with incredible grace and ease, dodged the fatal blow, astonishing even Yuziu himself. The monstrous spider was laughing maniacally, theatrically and eerily greeting the overconfident living people in its gladiator arena. The creature let out a shriek, spraying venom, and screamed that it intended to have plenty of fun, then with monstrous force, slammed its powerful paws straight into the concrete floor. The ceilings instantly developed deep cracks and began to collapse rapidly beneath their feet. Cromwell panicked, shouting that the floor was sinking into the abyss and everyone needed to retreat to the sterns immediately. The protagonist, caught right in the heart of the attack, began to plummet rapidly downward. All this happened under the system's panic screams in his head that now they were definitely done for, since the scrawny guy had no survival skills whatsoever. But the noble Commander Uju, without hesitation for even a split second, heroically lunged after the falling guy and clamped onto his arm with an iron grip. Shocked allies, frozen in paralyzing disbelief, watched as the protagonist, together with their brave captain, plunged at tremendous speed deep below, straight into the gaping, lightless unknown. The system in the hero's head was literally going crazy, persistently demanding that the protagonist wake up immediately. She began praying frantically, just hoping Bai Wu would wake from that dangerous stupor soon. As soon as the hero started coming to, the system felt genuine relief that he hadn't died, because if the guy had kept sleeping, he would have definitely become a bloodthirsty fallen one. She said it outright, if the captain hadn't stepped in time, Bai Wu would have met certain doom. Meanwhile, the cool-headed Uju, looking around, noted that they were now on the very bottom floor of this building. The man also noted that the layout of this place turned out, surprisingly, to be extremely simple. The only structures here were massive columns. Drawing on his experience, the captain confidently stated that just recently, 10 fierce fallen of different kinds had fought to the death at this spot. He was genuinely surprised that the room itself had remained completely untouched. At the same time, the system generously dumped it on Bai Wu, noting that the guy clearly deserved his knowledge, since he picked things up so fast. The system informed the hero that this was the so-called 12th student, an unbelievably stubborn being. The hero immediately built a logical chain. If there was a student, then there was probably some teacher too. Suddenly, the system told the protagonist to watch his head, since the ceiling above him looked dilapidated. And sure enough, something started falling from above with a dull thud. Watching this, Yuzu noticed that in the end the building turned out to be nowhere near as sturdy as it had seemed at first. Then suddenly, a torrent of thoughts crashed into the hero's mind from a fully fallen one who had managed to bend the others to his will and threatened another being with swallowing the key. The protagonist was sure that if the creature started making such a confident racket, it must have had no doubt about its victory. What also surprised Bai Wu was the fact that he could literally see the living thoughts of the fallen, not just read dry information. He reasonably assumed that number 12 was the monster shown in the photo. The protagonist sank deep into thought, preparing to sum up the information. He was certain that, at that time, people definitely hadn't entered the tower yet. The hero was also surprised that Yuzia and many others didn't know the dark history of this place. In the protagonist's mind, the image of a massive door began to take shape. Now Bai Wu clearly understood that this whole building was some kind of prison and gladiator arena, where monsters fought each other, and the winner moved on. In his visions on the third floor, number 12 sincerely believed that the premonition of death was a useful stimulus for him, after which he mercilessly devoured another monster. By the fourth floor, room 12 was already trying to run from death, grumbling to himself in disgust about the awful quality of the food. On the sixth floor, 12 met an interesting opponent and ate him whole, thereby showing a unique sign of respect. On the 12th floor, he slyly thought about how he'd keep pretending to be weak, but by the 10th, he was already sure he was the strongest here. Having reached the 12th floor, this monster clearly understood that soon it would become fully formed and fulfill the teacher's long-cherished dream of destroying the tower. However, on the 14th floor, he was met with bitter disappointment, as he had lost the battle. The arrogant monster refused to understand how trash from the first building could defeat him. The protagonist realized that the turning point had happened on the -14th floor. The hero was sure that at some point, that poor girl had been forcibly transferred from the 11th floor of the first building to the second. The protagonist logically assumed that this place had been trying to artificially create the strongest monster, and the 12th disciple had come a long way before losing to the poor guy. Bai Wu realized an astonishing fact. The absolute boss of the 4th core once defeated the boss of the 2nd core, and this historic discovery was incredibly interesting to the hero. On the 15th floor, stunned number 12 ran into countless hands. As it turned out, the poor girl's unique ability let her turn negative emotions into physical limbs. Bai Wu was astonished by how much the arrogant monster had changed after the defeat. Earlier, he had naively convinced himself that he'd only lost because he hadn't absorbed enough monsters, and he planned to fix that before taking revenge. But reality turned out to be harsher. The poor girl beat the 12th one a second time, after which she was moved on, and that broken monster was left right there. The protagonist was genuinely amazed by how the monster ran into an impassable wall. I'm burning inside that I couldn't even show my beloved teacher the peak of my power. Coming to, the protagonist began reporting his findings to the captain. He said that the number 12 was the number of that fallen one they had just seen, and the hideous creature in the photo was that monster. The hero described in detail exactly how the fallen were created at this very place, then deliberately made stronger and set against one another. After hearing this, the cool-headed commander guessed that if this monster's number was 12, then at least that many of these creatures had been created in total. Udziu started worrying a lot, because he understood perfectly well that his allies would hardly be able to deal with such a high-level enemy on their own. He decided to immediately see if there was a direct way up from here. Meanwhile, out of the thick darkness, something watched him closely and hungrily. Uju instantly sensed the enemy rushing in and immediately gripped the hilt of his blade tightly. He bitterly understood that returning to his comrades would have to be delayed because of the creatures that had appeared. The captain gave the hero a clear order to stay alert and keep his distance. Yuzu said that in the event of extreme danger, Bai must use the Gorgon Lantern, which can hold back enemies, though if he tries to use it against powerful fallen, it won't have any real effect. The system stated tensely that the creatures appearing before the kids were not ordinary fallen ones. Or rather, once upon a time they were, but now their nature has changed. The system immediately drew the boy's attention to the arm of one of the monsters, confidently stating that it was an extremely rare hardening mutation. Meanwhile, the enemy himself was already ready to attack. The monster struck with all its might, but the agile captain immediately delivered a huge number of precise cuts, neutralizing the attack. Without losing momentum, Udziu leaped to an unbelievably great height, then came crashing down on the monster at an impossible speed. The system proudly declared that thanks to his skill, the captain had truly inhuman reflexes, and although this fallen one was high level, he physically could not win. The insightful hero guessed that these strange creatures were the very fallen ones that the 12th had once landed. The system confirmed it, the hero was absolutely right. She explained in detail that these are now summoned little ones of that fallen one, and their intelligence is far more primitive. The system also added that in theory, these beings shouldn't have had physical bodies at all, since they were artificially created by the 12th. Suddenly, the system ominously hinted that movement was happening right behind the hero's back. He spun around abruptly and was stunned when, right behind him, a fallen appeared out of nowhere, dangerously close to combat. The protagonist immediately used the artifact. Sure enough, the expected petrification didn't work, and the monster only got a minor speed debuff. The hero narrowly dodged the blow, being plainly upset that the artifact hadn't worked to its full extent, but was still glad he managed to avoid the enemy's claws. At that very moment, the captain's gleaming blade was already rushing toward the monster. However, the creature had an incredibly rare mutation that allowed it to sense danger. Thanks to her, it was able to dodge the captain's attack at the very last moment, though it was injured. The wounded monster coward immediately started hiding from the strong man. It seemed the commander was extremely displeased that he'd let the monster slip away so absurdly. However, Bai Wu firmly said he could handle the monster alone, and Ju needed to finish off the others as soon as possible. The responsible commander hesitated for a second, but the hero reassured him, making it clear he already had specific ideas about the upcoming battle. At that moment, another disgusting monster appeared in the arena, looking like a shapeless slime. It had a rare mutation that let it distort the space around it. The monster looked carefully toward the kids, then suddenly attacked unpredictably as the system screamed in panic, begging Bai Wu to dodge. The quick commander got there first. He roughly grabbed the subordinate by the collar and pulled him away from the monster. Meanwhile, the indifferent protagonist only complained to himself that they had run into yet another extremely unpleasant ability. The slime monster stood motionless for a while, then began attacking the kids with its elastic arms. The elusive commander easily dodged every whipping blow. Suddenly he froze in place, then pushed off hard, jumped, and began skillfully bouncing off the monster's hands. Thanks to this trick, he was able to get right up close to the creature's nasty head. Yuziu promised in a cold tone that this monster would end up exactly like those spawn above, after which he mercilessly cut down his opponent. To his surprise, the creature didn't die. The vigilant hero clearly spotted the hidden mutation in the liquid body and was also able to identify this creature's only weakness, its central eye. Meanwhile, Bai Wu himself was left completely alone with the cowardly monster. The internal system strongly recommended always facing the monster so it wouldn't dare to cowardly attack from behind. The cunning monster began appearing right behind the hero, after which Bai Wu deftly dodged every strike. At the same time, the guy rightly pointed out, the monster attacked only him, completely ignoring the dangerous captain. The system immediately confirmed the suspicion that something was clearly attracting the monster to him specifically. It seemed the brilliant Bai Wu had finally understood exactly what these creatures of darkness were afraid of. At the system's worried question of how an unarmed guy was planning to win, he only gave a sly smile. The hero immediately began shouting at the top of his lungs to his captain. Udziu, in the heat of battle, didn't immediately understand what Bai Wu wanted from him, until the protagonist threw the magic artifact with force, shouting loudly that the monster's weak spot was in the central eye. The cherished lantern flew straight to the captain. The hero kept staring in his direction, completely sure that the experienced Ju would do everything right. The man immediately switched on the flashlight, and a blinding light began quickly filling the space around them. The light was so bright that it literally blinded the hero. Bai Wu clearly understood that what these monsters feared most was pure light, and he also knew that right now the best place to hide safely was deep shadow. Meanwhile, exactly 10 minutes ago, on the upper floors, a spiked spider leg of a deadly monster was moving at a crazy speed. Bravely, Gromilla took the full brunt of that devastating blow, blocking it solidly. The other allies immediately, without wasting a second, moved in unison toward the giant monster to launch a counterattack. They moved toward the spider together, like one machine, and the young Shang Xiaoi tensed up, ready to strike the decisive blow and put absolutely all his strength into it. However, from the monster's hand, disgusting tendrils suddenly began to emerge, which turned into an incredibly sturdy shield. This improvised defense easily kept the monster safe from the guy's attacks. The menacing monster smiled, saying it would catch them all right now. The creature immediately shot out a stream of sticky webbing, into which the blue-haired girl seemed certain to be caught. In truth, only by some miracle did the guys manage to avoid that trap. Shan Shaoyi complained angrily that Lin Wuzhu, instead of saving him, chose to save the girl. The enemy watched the surviving kids with the utmost attention and malice. He was frighteningly close, and only because Gromala intervened in time did the other allies avoid being hit by the attack. Wang Shi immediately got his fist ready and easily smashed through the monster's chitinous leg. It seemed the high-level monster had been provoked by such a daring move. He rapidly began altering his injured arm, after which he immediately attacked the brute, shouting furiously that with powers like that, humans had no chance of winning. At that moment, Lin stepped in, lashing out with his whip, holding part of the monster's arm in place while Brute kept a tight grip on the other. Taking advantage of the moment, the guys worked together to chop the monster's ugly limb cleanly into 2 pieces. The arrogant guy was genuinely glad they'd managed to disarm the enemy. Sure enough, his solemn gaze suddenly darkened. It turned out this monster had terrifying regeneration. If you gave the creature even a little time, the monster would fully recover. At this rate, the battle could have lasted forever. Hearing their words about an endless battle, the creepy boss gloatingly declared that the pathetic humans were deeply mistaken. He started producing an enormous amount of sticky webbing, causing heavy stones from the ceiling to fall straight to the ground. The distorted-looking monster said it would finish these people off right here and now. Lin stood there with his mouth open, and had no idea where their captain even was in this deadly moment. Then another horrifying detail came to light. New monsters began pouring out of the crack in the ruined ceiling, slowly descending to the ground. The guys were in absolute shock at the unimaginable number of enemies they now had to face. Returning to the present time on the lower floor, the activated lantern flooded the entire space with a bright, searing light. The slimy monster began moving chaotically, which somewhat surprised the captain, since now 2 disoriented monsters were in critical proximity to him. Without wasting a second, the cool-headed Yuziu used his skill called Limit Shadow. He gripped the blade tighter and with one precise strike, cut down one of the monsters. Right after that, he shot off like a bullet toward the big-eyed monster and immediately attacked it right at its weakest point, the central eye. The observer of this system excitedly declared that this hard battle was finally successfully over. But the captain himself was openly angry at the rookie because of the needless risk. Yuziu said that if someone else had been in his place, they simply wouldn't have had time to react to the hero's throw. Bai Wu himself calmly justified his actions by saying he decided to do it precisely because someone as reliable as the captain was. Surveying the battlefield, Uju noticed a troubling oddity. There was clearly something wrong with the slain fallen. Because after death, they vanished without the slightest trace. He noted that all that remained of the monsters was just traces, like thick cobwebs. After comparing the facts, he reasonably assumed it was a unique ability of that monster up above. And he thought that he could create little monsters out of web. Realizing the scale of the threat, Uju grew even more worried about the team. He understood that, even if these summoned fallen ones had such power, the guys would hardly be able to handle their leader. Then suddenly, cutting through his anxious thoughts, the familiar figures of his allies, with shouts, began to fall straight out of a hole in the ceiling onto the stunned guys. Bai Wu just discussed with the captain that their allies won't be able to handle the monster above. Then, suddenly, the system sent him an alarming notification. A 6th-level fallen was rapidly approaching them. Meanwhile, comrades started literally raining down from the ceiling, and the protagonist managed to warn the commander of their arrival. While falling freely, Shang Xiaoyi shouted to the others that Uju and Bai Wu were below. After that, the whole group landed right on them. Wang Shi sternly demanded that the boy not dare to let his guard down, since a whole horde of enemies was up against them. The commander didn't waste a second and shot off at incredible speed. He signaled his allies to act, and Lin Uzzo understood his commander's tactical plan with perfect precision. The guy instantly lowered his whip into action, giving Uju a great foothold for a second dash. For the 3rd jump, the commander used Romula's massive arm, which forcefully hurled his leader high into the air. The soldiers regrouped safely on the ground. Lin smiled faintly, while Wang Shi was absolutely sure of his captain's crushing power. Meanwhile, the swordsman slowly began to draw his blade. A heavy, oppressive atmosphere gathered around him, after which he literally vanished into thin air, and several lightning-fast attacks came crashing down on the mutants. The monsters instantly took fatal damage from Yuzu, who, because of his unbelievable speed, seemed to split in 2. The guys were shouting excitedly that their leader was the strongest. The system also kept praising the guy, enthusiastically declaring that he was incredibly cool. Clinging to a stone ledge, the captain landed 1 floor up. He had already clearly realized where their main enemy was hiding. A huge spider was right behind him, with a predatory, terrifying smile on its ugly face. Mektic reacted instantly, creating distance while trying to launch a counterattack. The brute shouted from below, asking the boss to be as careful as possible, since the enemy was astonishingly strong. Wancher suggested that the fallen had reached at least the 5th danger level. That mutant himself confidently admitted that the weaklings before were no match for him at all. In striking contrast to Utsuyu. Despite acknowledging the human strength, the creature immediately lunged into attack, sincerely believing itself to be invincible. Instead of pulling back into a hard defense, the commander fearlessly charged straight ahead. He slipped through the monster's deadly lunge, deftly parrying with his blade, and delivered an incredibly fast, deep slash that nearly cost the spider a limb. Utsuyu darted past the monster, but instead of a grimace of pain, it broke into an even wider smile. The creature clamped onto the swordsman's leg with a death grip and slammed him with primal force straight into the hard concrete floor. All this was happening to the system's ominous listing of the enemy's dangerous mutations. Severe, durable iron, acid corrosion, entanglement in sticky webs, penetration by toxic substances, unnatural limb stretching, and superhuman fast reflexes. From the internal wounds he'd suffered, the captain began coughing up his own blood hard. Meanwhile, the fallen was repairing damaged tissue at a terrifying rate. Turns out, he was hiding a few more rare abilities in his arsenal: monstrous regeneration and damage blocking. But most importantly, he had a perfected mutation, allowing him to repeatedly sharpen his reaction at the thin line between life and death. Artificial intelligence was shocked by the fact that an ordinary human managed to fight such a superior being on equal footing. The system asked the hero whether they should continue to passively rely only on the commander's stamina. And then she firmly declared that Bai Wu must kill that monster himself, with his own hands. The program explained that only in that scenario would he have the chance to permanently obtain the defeated one's unique talent. The protagonist was clearly delighted by the enticing prospect of mastering a completely new ability. On the arena, Uju and the monster kept moving non-stop at tremendous speed. After another brutal clash, the monster let out a shriek and lost several spike legs, while the exhausted captain was sent flying back to his uneasy comrades. In a stern voice, he asked the squad not to approach the center of the battle, but completely unexpectedly, the newbie strode forward confidently, speaking calmly to the leader. The brute couldn't make sense of what suicidal stupidity this unarmed guy was committing right now. However, the protagonist himself, keeping his cool, said he'd handle the enemy on his own from here on out. He was heading straight for the snarling monster on purpose, while his allies wondered how a green, weak newbie could possibly have any chance of surviving. In those seconds, the monster had already fully recovered from the injuries it had just suffered. Uju sternly demanded that the foolish subordinate retreat at once, but Bai Wu only gently asked him to trust him, assuring him that he clearly understood exactly how to proceed to victory. The hero quietly ordered the guys to try their best to act as calm and absolutely indifferent observers. Wang Shi immediately noticed the captain's distorted, bewildered face, who clearly didn't understand why his direct orders were being openly ignored. The soldiers began to awkwardly deny it, not wanting to report his face to their leader at all. In the end, Bai Wu warned that no one was to strike first until the mutated fallen made the move himself. The monster gave a disgusting little giggle in anticipation, watching the guy approach. It dismissively saw him as its new weak rival, though it made no difference to the creature who stood before it. All the people who arrived were seen only as fresh prey from the tower. The mutant braced for a deadly attack as Bai Wu confidently closed the distance. The spider suddenly shot out its long arm and immediately clamped a powerful choking grip around the hero. Held in these arms, Bai Wu suddenly turned to the monster with a faint, indulgent smile, as if it were his own child. At the same time, he firmly declared that he had not come from the tower at all. At the familiar tone, the eerie creature froze in place. The hero, with feigned bitterness, was amazed that the fallen one dared to forget him, since he was his very last creation and the best of all the artificially created children. Project codenamed Ilya. A stunned mutant began to shakily pull back his sticky hand. Completely unable to understand what the hell was happening now, his clouded mind refused to believe reality. He clearly saw in the man standing there the image of his deeply beloved creator and teacher. Meanwhile, the cold-blooded Bai Wu himself was mercilessly declaring that Ilya was actually just an ordinary pathetic loser. Deep down, the clever protagonist was deeply surprised by the remarkable fact that his so-called disciple, over all those long years of isolation, had not become completely dull and had still retained some self-awareness. Hearing the harsh words of rejection, the giant Ilya immediately started screaming hysterically that such disappointment was simply impossible. He was straining his vocal cords, asking only one painful question. If his beloved teacher had been alive all this time, then why never once came to visit him? The commander watching the scene was shocked to the core. It took the unarmed hero just a couple of words to drive this invincible, fearsome monster insane in an instant. The logical Uju reasonably assumed that the rookie had managed to obtain some incredibly valuable information in that strange room. But even then, I had no idea how Bai Wu dealt with the Black Hands from the abyss. The confident hero came right up and touched the trembling monster, mockingly calling it a miserable poor soul.
He was astonished.
Could that naive fallen one really have sincerely believed that the great creator had died, since he had stayed away from his resting place for so long? According to the harsh legend, the scientist simply didn't want to remind himself once again of his shameful failures. He said with deep feeling that Ilya had originally been a flawlessly ideal prototype, but in the end became a true ugly failure in the career of a brilliant researcher. Bai Wu, looking straight into the monster's pain-filled eyes, firmly declared that he could not accept such a disgusting outcome in his life. Heartbroken, Ilya flatly refused to believe what he'd heard, desperately trying to convince himself that he was still the best, the deadliest work of the creator. The cold analyst mentally noted that his psychological attack had worked brilliantly, and he had successfully rattled his opponent. Realizing the victim was on the hook, he kept manipulating him, asking whether Ilya even knew the real reason he'd once been left to rot in this godforsaken place. The hero immediately explained that the mutant was placed here solely in the faint hope that it would evolve and become stronger. But even with a chance given, the bastard kept disappointing, because it was simply afraid to openly stand against some worthless little nobody from the neighboring fourth block. Bai Wu angrily noted that, in the end, because of this cowardice, he was the one who had to clean up all the bloody aftermath. And that meant that number 12 was not only useless trash, but also caused the creator a lot of extra problems. Listening to this surreal conversation, Shang Xiaoyi simply couldn't believe what was happening. He knew for sure the hero was exploring this dangerous area for the very first time in his life, but it seemed Bai Wu had some mystical power and could see the fallen soul straight through. Meanwhile, the cleverly Wuzhou made a grimace, straining his brain to the limit as he tried to make logical sense of this insane flood of information. The protagonist kept rubbing salt in the wound, mercilessly saying that the very existence of such a freak had dealt an incredible blow to an impeccable scientific reputation. He pointed out that their main target, the tower, still stands impregnable, while time itself has not been wasted, and the genius has successfully raised many more new children, surpassing the outdated model by hundreds of times. The guy said with brutal contempt that it was number 12 that turned out to be his only indelible stain of shame. The enormous monster, shattered by these words, immediately fell prostrate in tears from its many eyes and began pitifully begging the idol for forgiveness. The humiliated creature fully admitted he was a worthless failure and desperately begged for one more final chance. Watching the psychological humiliation, the system could no longer take it and was begging the hero in its mind to stop immediately, because this poor child's mind had been completely shattered into pieces. The artificial intelligence was genuinely amazed by the phenomenal acting skill with which the human so eerily and convincingly copied the die-pastiche character of the famous researcher. Because their database had absolutely no information on this person. At this revelation, Bai Wu mentally admitted to the program that he had simply, in the smallest details, imitated the cold manner of his own father. The protagonist quickly analyzed everything he learned from the old records. This terrifying spider, deep down, was just an ordinary arrogant but loyal dog, suffering from a cruel lack of love. He blindly adored only one person and sincerely dreamed of becoming his perfect weapon. The analyst understood the toxic nature of their relationship. Cunning mentor wanted the mutant to pose as an obedient test subject, while secretly ruthlessly devouring other fallen ones to build power. However, competing scientists created a far more fearsome creature. The poor thing, who effortlessly defeated Ilya 3 times in a row, which is why he started to think of himself as a worthless weakling. The protagonist was absolutely sure that somewhere in the future he would definitely meet the true creator of this poor soul, and even in absentia regarded him as a truly twisted and evil being. To seal his brilliant bluff once and for all, the guy casually pulled an old comb from his jacket pocket with a gesture. Seeing the keepsake trophy, the broken monster stopped doubting that the invincible creator had personally tracked down and finished off that hated poor girl. The domineering protagonist softened his tone and suggested ending this dragged-out conversation. He said that even despite the project's massive failure, its creator never forgot about his own creation. Having heard a tiny bit of approval, the giant mutant began to crawl obediently toward the man, solemnly promising to carry out absolutely any order without question. The hero nodded approvingly and solemnly said that Ilya was still a very important part of the great plan to create an absolute, complete being, and stated that he planned to grant the suffering fallen one true eternity. He reminded the creature how, in the past, an incalculable number of weaker beings had become part of Ilya himself. Now he was firmly demanding that his loyal student make the ultimate sacrifice and voluntarily become an integral part of the teacher himself. The meek monster fully agreed to such a role, and with tearful, burning enthusiasm asked exactly what it was supposed to do. The guy came right up and started whispering very quietly directly into the ear of the huge creature, his stone face showing no emotion at all. At the command, the hideous monster instantly froze, choking on bitter tears and thick snot. At the end of the performance, Bai Wu gave the chitin-covered creature a fatherly hug. Obeying its creator's will, the mutant slowly and hopelessly began to crawl away. Staggering badly from inner dissonance, he slowly got to his feet. In an instant, something bright red suddenly began rushing out of his torso. More and more thick fluid spilled from the deformed body as the monster thrashed in a frantic hysterical laugh, full of pain and despair. It began flailing its blade-like arms chaotically, literally tearing itself to pieces, causing the entire area to be instantly drenched in a spouting blue substance. The allies watching this horrific scene of self-destruction were simply paralyzed and deeply shocked by the nightmare. Meanwhile, thanks to this victory, the calculating fighter officially added a brand new ultra-rare talent, top 76, called Taotai, to his arsenal. This mystical ability allowed the owner, by consuming an enemy's flesh, to permanently gain part of their unique traits. The system's inner voice helpfully reminded me that the coveted key needed to move forward was deep inside the already lifeless body. Everyone who was worth anything was completely stunned, unable to understand how, by some magic, the invincible monster had willingly and brutally finished itself off. After coming to, the astute commander was the first to, with undisguised suspicion, logically state that absolutely any successful dialogue of this level must be based on specific secret information. He directly asked where an inexperienced young man could have learned so much about a creature's distant past. In response, Bai Wu merely tiredly shook his head, firmly reminding them that he had already promised last time not to explain anything else. He sincerely believed that since they were comrades in arms now, there should be unconditional trust between them, without any intrusive questions. Simplistic Garamala was still in cultural shock and could only laugh nervously at the absurd fact that he was seeing something like a verbal monster slaying for the first time. The analytical Shan Xiaoi reasonably recalled that, before this incident, they had always fought only primitive, dim-witted creatures. Aesthete Yilin summed up in a voice icy cold. Over the tower's 700 long years, humanity learned one thing for sure: never, ever try to treat a mutated fallen like a sentient being. The practical protagonist simply asked the big guy Wong to take out the artifact they needed. But Garamala grimaced in disgust and said half-jokingly that such jewelry work was a perfect fit for a curalist Lin. He let out a heavy sigh, reached into a deep pocket, and began slowly pulling out a whole surgical kit of gleaming instruments. The system described this specialized arsenal as a professional way to get everything you need out of a rotting carcass without getting your hands dirty or splashing infected blood. And while the focus guy skillfully got to work as a butcher, Bai Wu, intrigued, asked the system in his mind whether researchers always needed a physical key to get through. The neural network, with a slight hint of sarcasm, advised the user to strain their brain a little and think for themselves. Let me remind you, all these tragic events happened long before the Tower era began. After piecing together the facts, the hero concluded that the entire ruined world was tightly bound by system rules. That's exactly why the fragile old buildings, sewers, and this ominous hospital have miraculously survived through centuries of chaos. And these strange doors that magically won't open without a special key, it's all part of the strict laws of a distorted world. The meticulous Lin has already started carefully wiping the surgical knife. He reported the artifact had been successfully retrieved and immediately suggested the team move on with the recon, now that they had a real chance to open the massive metal door. The scene smoothly shifts into the air corridor of the second hospital building. Walking over the dark slabs, Bai Wu was anxiously recalling the frightening fact that there had been no word for a very long time from the previous owner of the 75th talent. The person just vanished without a trace in the brutal wastelands. Meanwhile, the hero himself, unbeknownst to everyone, possessed not only his original rare top 24 talent, but also a completely new top 76 skill. After weighing all the risks of drawing unwanted attention, Protocones made the most rational decision possible, to tell no one in the squad the truth about his true hidden abilities. The attentive commander noticed the rookie had gone deep into thought for a long time and asked him directly what he was thinking about. In fact, a paradox tormented the hero's inquiring mind. He was incredibly curious to understand why all these powerful mutants simply didn't leave the crumbling hospital, since physically they were free to move around. Yujiad let out a heavy sigh and said that in the scientific community, there simply is no proper explanation for this strange phenomenon. However, numerous field observations suggested that the fallen were, in some mysterious way, continuously bound to the specific places where they lived. Upon hearing this, the protagonist began developing a theory. He reasonably believed that the location itself could not be destroyed by time, and that even the people trapped inside could not leave it of their own will. The captain only skeptically said that this hard-binding hypothesis has not been proven by anyone, so it is hard to consider it a full law. Their conversation was suddenly cut short. Scout Shan Xiaoyi began carefully scanning the entire third building with his skill. After reviewing the readings, he reported with obvious relief that no enemy signals were detected in the new building at all, which meant the group could move on completely without the risk of running into an ambush. Upon hearing the report, Uju asked the hero what he personally thought about it. Bai Wu's faithful system immediately activated in his mind. She said that many decades ago, ordinary people lived in this building, but now they're all long dead, and all that's left of them are mountains of boring papers and documents. Besides, the AI warned that the legendary little lady had already set her sights on the hero. That's exactly why she deliberately left him several deadly, dangerous clues to the plot. After that intriguing lead-in, the program asked whether the hero wanted to wrap up the mission and go home, or keep going. Without hesitation, Bai Wu loudly ordered the squad to boldly open the heavy doors to the new block. Though my inner self was extremely unhappy with such a suicidal decision. Executive Lin immediately inserted the artifact into the keyhole, turned the rusty metal, and with a loud screech, fully opened the massive doors. The panicking system tried to persuade and stop the young man by absolutely any means available, but none of it had the slightest effect. In helpless rage, the voice in his head could only comically complain that it had been stuck escorting such a stupid, overconfident dead man. Realizing that talking the stubborn one out of it was useless, the restraint neural network decided to get serious about work. She said anxiously that this oppressive room was absolutely soaked through with the poor thing's old rotting grievances, and that everyone, therefore, should be dozens of times more careful. When the squad entered the hall, it came as a complete surprise that the old electric elevator in the abandoned building was still working fine. As the creaking cabin doors opened, the care system strongly advised keeping a close eye on every crew member. Because she clearly warned us, if anyone gets lost on this enchanted floor, they'll lose any ghost of a chance of coming back alive forever. Analyzing the risks, the young man understood clearly that their commander was a phenomenally physically strong fighter, but even his brute force would be completely useless without a working teleportation disc. Without the artifact, the whole elite squad will get stuck here like in a tight mousetrap. At the same time, the tactician also realized that the poor thing herself physically couldn't leave the bounds of her block, and he guessed at her remote psychological tricks and illusions in the near future. Stepping into the cramped elevator, the hero, without a word, confidently pressed the warn button for the third floor. The other fighters nervously exchanged glances and didn't quite understand the logic behind the random choice of location. Noticing the interference, the protagonist Suha stated that the most important plot clue was right on this very floor. Hearing that chilling certainty, the suspicious commander even got the feeling the guy had definitely been to this godforsaken place before. And Yuziu, in a very stern tone, demanded an immediate explanation. With a frown, the young man said irritably that by nature he was quite reserved and absolutely did not like to spell out his private thoughts or explain anything in detail. However, in the end, the steadfast hero took pity and decided to make an exception, since the captain so sincerely wanted to know the saving answers. To start, Bai Wu reminded everyone present of the moment when the mutant with the creepy voice got to the boy's emotions, while the emotionless newcomer headed straight into the locked room. The guy explained logically that most likely, precisely because his outward emotions were strictly at zero, the mental attack simply didn't work, and he heard a completely different insistent voice. All the other veterans were in utter shock at the incredible fact that on Bai Wu's smartwatch, the panic indicator always showed absolute zero. Whereas the strictly practical commander was far more interested in what exactly the subordinate had managed to find inside that ominous room. The young man calmly described the mysterious voice of an invisible entity, which in an ultimatum, demanded that he choose only 2 random things out of 3. And Bai Wu made his conscious choice, taking the old diary and the elegant comb. Pragmatic Lin absolutely didn't understand why the calculating hero didn't choose the obviously useful key and just take absolutely everything by force. BYU said that doing that was systemically impossible, because under the strict rules of the cursed room, after 2 items were chosen, the remaining third artifact would instantly vanish into thin air. What's more, the guy's intuition told him that the unknown key seemed like something too suspicious and deadly dangerous. Piecing together the mosaic, Uju correctly guessed that all the secret information about the monster Bai Wu's painful past came from the faded pages of an old diary. The young man readily confirmed that deduction, proudly saying that it was precisely thanks to the tragic recordings that he was able to so easily break the powerful Ilio psychologically. When his comrades asked the logical question of where the valuable artifact was physically right now, Bai Wu said with slight regret. As soon as he finished reading the madman's text to the very end, the folio simply crumbled into grey dust and vanished without a trace right in his hands. Concluding his detailed report, the guy clarified that at this point, the only thing he had left was that elegant comb.